The wind howled through the peaks of North Cascades National Park, Washington, carrying with it the bitter edge of an approaching cold front. Evelyn Barker, known to most as Evie, stepped off the gondola with practiced ease, her well-worn hiking boots crunching against the icy trail. At 68 years old, her movements were slow but sure, every step echoing decades of experience carved into the landscape around her. Her eyes, steely blue and still sharp despite the passage of time, scanned the foggy path ahead. The visibility was poor, thick clouds rolling over the mountaintops like waves, but she wasn't concerned. Evie had walked these trails more times than she could count, taught survival classes along them, and rescued stranded hikers from them for over 30 years as a backcountry ranger and wilderness instructor. Now retired, she still came back regularly, though never before under such painful circumstances. She adjusted the weight of her pack and made her way toward the old wooden lodge nestled in the trees, one of the few shelters hikers could count on when the weather turned. Its pine log structure stood resolute against the harshness of the mountain, smoke curling lazily from the chimney, promising warmth and temporary refuge. She dropped her heavy backpack in the foyer and stomped the snow off her boots as the scent of firewood and pine filled the air. A familiar face looked up from behind the check-in desk. "Miss Barker?" the young man asked, his expression softening with recognition. "Didn't expect to see you back this soon." "Hello, Noah," Evie said, her voice carrying a calm strength that masked the ache beneath. Noah leaned forward, his tone lowered. "Any word about your family?" She shook her head slowly, the wrinkles around her eyes deepening. To most of the staff and regular hikers, Evie was something of a legend. Evie the Old Ranger, a name passed down in trail tales and campfire stories. After retirement, she'd become known for organizing women's survival retreats in the park, earning even more respect in her second chapter of life. "Not yet," she replied as she unzipped her coat. "That's why I'm back." Noah nodded, saying nothing more. What was there to say? Everyone in the nearby towns had heard about what happened. Her son, David, his wife Naomi, and their twin daughters, Isla and Rowan, had vanished nearly a month ago. What was supposed to be a routine weekend hiking trip had unraveled into a nightmare. Evie pulled a stack of missing person flyers from her pack. The top one showed a smiling family of 4. David stood strong in a dark green hoodie. Naomi had her signature warm smile, and the girls, both 7 now, beamed in matching grins, their baby teeth missing in all the same places. Isla wore yellow. Rowan wore lavender. "I'm hoping to refresh the posters around the lodge and near the trailheads," she said, offering the stack. "Of course," Noah replied without hesitation. "Manager already said we should help however we can." "Thank you," Evie said with quiet gratitude. The kindness from the park staff over the last 3 weeks had been one of the few things keeping her grounded. As she moved through the lodge, carefully pinning new flyers onto bulletin boards and beside trail maps, Evie replayed the last day she spoke to her son. It was a Saturday morning, and David had called to invite her along for the hike. "Come on, Mom," he'd said cheerfully. "The girls have been begging for your mountain lion stories all week." She had wanted to go, nearly canceled her other plans, but the fundraiser event for environmental education she had committed to months earlier couldn't be postponed. "Next time," she promised, "take lots of pictures for me." And they had. Around midday, while she was setting up exhibits at the event, her phone buzzed with a message. It was a photo, a perfect family shot taken against the rugged skyline. Same spot as always. Naomi had told her once she wanted to build a photo series over the years, to show the girls growing up with the mountains staying the same behind them. It had felt so sweet, so grounded. Later that evening, when Evie finally got home, she noticed several missed calls from David. There was one text message: "Weather turning bad. Cutting hike short. Talk later." She called him back immediately, but the line went straight to voicemail. Naomi's phone did the same. She told herself not to panic. Cell service up in the North Cascades could be unreliable, and they had spent nights up there before. But when the next morning came and there was still no sign of them, the quiet dread crystallized into something heavier. That day, she called the sheriff. Search and rescue teams mobilized within hours. Helicopters scanned from above, while volunteers, many of whom had once followed David along trails when he was just a boy tagging along with his ranger mom, helped comb the paths below. It became one of the largest local search operations in years. But after 10 days of scouring the mountains, the official stance began to shift. Ms. Barker, the lead coordinator, said gently, "We've searched every logical route they might have taken. With the recent storms and temperature drops, we have to consider the likelihood of a tragic accident." But Evie didn't believe it. She couldn't. Her son was raised in these woods. He knew the danger signs. He would never have pushed forward if he thought there was any real risk. He would have found shelter. He would have turned back. Something else had happened. And while law enforcement scaled down the official effort, Evie returned to the mountain herself. If no one else would find them, she would. As she stepped outside the lodge, the sky was bruising toward twilight. She walked to the main trailhead, pinning a flyer there, her fingers stinging in the cold. With each poster, she thought of that last picture, of smiles taken too close to an unseen disaster. A young couple passed by, their eyes drawn to the flyer. They looked at her with a flash of recognition, then sympathy. She was used to that by now. But sympathy wouldn't bring her family back. Resolve would. With her flyers posted, Evie gazed up at the snow-covered ridgeline disappearing into clouds. Somewhere up there, she was sure, the answers waited. And she would find them, no matter what. Evie continued her meticulous posting of the missing person flyers along the rugged trails that wound through the northern edge of the park. She stopped hikers as they passed, showing them the flyer and asking if they'd seen her family. Each conversation followed a weary pattern: polite sympathy, concerned eyes, and inevitable shaking heads. "No, sorry. Wish we had. Hope you find them." After the 20th such reply, Evie's hope began to strain under the weight of the silence that had surrounded her family's disappearance. She took a deep breath and pushed farther up the trail. About 2 miles from the lodge, near a trail marker that pointed off toward a lesser-used path, she reached to attach another flyer when a figure emerged from the woods to her right. A man in his mid-50s stepped out from the trees. He wore a camouflage jacket with a blaze orange safety vest over it, a hunter's standard. His walk was firm, deliberate, the stride of someone who knew these woods well. "Excuse me," he called out, his breath forming puffs in the cold air. "Mind if I take one of those?" Evie turned, studying him. He had a weathered face, gray streaking his beard, and eyes that didn't miss a detail. "Of course," she replied, handing him a flyer. "Thanks. Name's Clint Jansen," he said, offering a gloved hand. "Been hunting and tracking in these parts over 30 years. Evie shook his hand firmly. "Evelyn Barker. Friends call me Evie." There was a flash of recognition in Clint's eyes. "The ranger? Heard stories about you. You ran solo rescues back in '98, didn't you?" "Among other years," Evie said with a half-smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Clint looked back at the flyer, studying the faces. "When did they go missing?" 23 days ago, Evie answered. "Nearly a full month now." Clint scratched at his beard thoughtfully and reached into his coat. "I set up trail cams out here for tracking wildlife. You never know what turns up. Let me check something." Evie's pulse spiked. "You think maybe?" "Could be nothing. But worth a look," he said, thumbing through the screen of a compact trail camera viewer. He slowed down suddenly, frowning as he scrolled. "Hold on." Evie stepped closer, heart hammering. Clint zoomed in on a grainy video frame, adjusting the contrast slightly. Miss Barker, I think you should see this. He turned the screen toward her. The footage showed three figures moving cautiously through the mist-shrouded underbrush. A woman with shoulder-length hair and two small children. The woman wore a light-colored jacket, coral or perhaps faded pink. One child wore yellow, the other lavender. Evie's breath hitched. That's Naomi. And those are Isla and Rowan. Her voice cracked on the names. Clint nodded slowly. I thought that might be them. Take a look at the timestamp. The date displayed in the corner read, 3 days ago. 3 days ago, Evie said, barely believing her eyes. They're alive. Her joy was immediate but complicated. But, David? Where is he? Clint adjusted the footage, trying to zoom out. This camera's stationary. It only captures what crosses right in front. If your son was walking behind them, he could have been missed. Or he's somewhere else entirely, Evie said, worry threading back into her voice. She studied the footage again, seeing how Naomi moved deliberately cautiously, but not like someone in panic. And the girls looked alert but tired. Their clothes were dirty, their movements hesitant. Where exactly did you capture this? She asked. Clint pulled up a GPS map on the same device, showing her the precise coordinates. Here, northern section, rough terrain, about 8 miles northeast from where we're standing. Evie frowned. That's outside the official search zone. Too dangerous, they said. No maintained trails, unstable cliffs, avalanche risk. But that's why no one looked there. Exactly, Clint said. Most wouldn't venture that way, let alone with children. Unless they had no choice, Evie muttered, her mind spinning. I need this footage. The police need to see it. I'll email it to you, Clint replied, tapping his device to initiate the transfer. He scribbled his number on a scrap of paper. And here, if you need more help. I know the North Sector better than most. Thank you, Evie said, clutching her phone as the video file landed in her inbox. This is the first real lead in weeks. Clint checked his watch. I should head back. Daylight's fading, and I've got what I came for. He gestured to the hunting pack at his feet. Will you be all right? I'll head back to the cabin. Call the police immediately, Evie said. They walked down the trail together, the snow crunching under their boots, the silence between them filled with unspoken tension. When they reached the lodge, Clint tipped his hat. Good luck, Miss Barker. Thank you, Clint, she replied, watching him walk toward the parking lot before turning back toward her rental cabin. Inside, with her hands trembling from cold and adrenaline, Evie pulled out her phone and called the lead investigator. Detective Walker speaking. This is Evelyn Barker, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. I have proof my family is alive. I need you to see it. She quickly explained how she met Clint Jansen, the footage from the trail cam, and the coordinates. Sending it now, she added, uploading the video into an email. She paced as she waited. It was nearly 4 p.m., and the mountain light was already beginning to fade. It does appear to be your daughter-in-law and granddaughters, Detective Walker admitted after a brief pause. However, we can't launch a search operation this late in the day. What do you mean? Evie demanded. They're out there right now. I understand, Walker said, but you're a former ranger. You know how risky nighttime operations are in that terrain. Low visibility, weather worsening. We'd risk more lives. Evie clenched her fists, staring out the frosted window at the dark clouds gathering overhead. Can you use helicopters? Not in this weather, and not safely at night. Besides, from the footage, they don't appear critically injured. They're moving. That gives us a window. Evie sank into a chair, torn between frustration and understanding. She knew the protocols, but knowing her family was so close yet unreachable gnawed at her. First light, Walker said. Be At the ranger station by 6 a.m. We'll assemble a search team. Given your experience, you can join. Thank you, Evie replied quietly. After the call ended, she stared at the still image of Naomi and the girls. Relief warred with unease. Where was David? Why hadn't he appeared in the footage? Something didn't add up. He would never have left them alone in dangerous territory. As darkness swallowed the mountain and snow began to fall once again, Evie whispered to the image on her screen, "Just hold on until morning." She didn't know what the next day would bring, but for the first time in weeks, she felt more than grief. She felt hope, and a quiet dread of the unknown truth still waiting in the forest. As dusk gave way to full night, the confines of Evie's cabin began to press in on her. Though the fireplace burned steadily, casting a soft amber glow across the rustic interior, the warmth did little to dispel the growing storm within her. She had seen her daughter-in-law and granddaughters alive. That should have brought peace, or at least temporary comfort. But instead, it stirred deeper questions. Why were they in such a remote area? And where was David? Evie tried to quiet her thoughts by focusing on practical needs. Her stomach growled, reminding her she hadn't eaten since breakfast. A glance at her watch read 6:30 p.m. She considered heating something up in the cabin, but the silence around her felt too loud. She needed to be around people, even if just for a while. She threw on her parka and headed across the snow-laced courtyard toward the main lodge. The snowfall had intensified since her earlier trek, thick flakes drifting down in the glow of outdoor lamps, covering tracks and turning the trails to white silence. Most of the day hikers had already returned. Only a few hardy souls remained, gathering near the roaring fireplace in the main lodge, their voices low and punctuated with occasional laughter. Evie entered quietly, the warmth and scent of food wrapping around her like a familiar blanket. Heads turned as she stepped inside, recognition flickering across several faces. Conversations faltered, then resumed, just a touch quieter than before. She accepted a cup of hot water from the self-serve station and retrieved a packet of instant noodles from her coat pocket. She settled into a chair at the room's edge, close enough to observe the activity, but far enough to avoid small talk. She needed stillness. And yet, she couldn't help but overhear snippets of conversation from two older men seated nearby. "That's Evelyn Barker, right?" one of them said, his voice low but not low enough. "The woman who gave all that money to the backcountry education fund." "Yeah," the other replied. "Sad story. Spent her life teaching wilderness safety, and now her son and grandkids disappear. It's like fate's mocking her." "If it were my family," the first man added, "I'd be out there searching. Storm or no storm." "She's pushing 70, the second replied, not unkindly. "And doing it alone. That's got to count for something." Evie stared into her steaming cup, her face stiff with the effort not to react. Their words echoed the guilt that had taken up permanent residence in her chest. She thought of David. Would he wait until morning if she were the one missing? No. He would move mountains. He would keep walking until his legs gave out, just as she had taught him. Evie's mind was already racing before she finished her noodles. She stood, left the cup behind, and returned to her cabin without a word. Once inside, she moved with purpose, shedding her outer coat and pulling out her gear with methodical speed. Years of search and rescue work had trained her for these exact conditions: poor visibility, freezing temperatures, and treacherous terrain. She layered up thermal base, fleece mid-layer, waterproof shell. She packed only the essentials: a compact first aid kit, emergency bivy sack, thermal blanket, protein bars, extra socks, and most importantly, her handheld GPS with Clint's coordinates already programmed. Her old search pack still held her foldable trekking poles, a multi-tool, and a headlamp. She tested its light, bright, crisp, reliable. Slipping on her reinforced boots, she tightened the straps and pulled a wool beanie low over her ears. Logic warned her that waiting until morning was safer. Protocol dictated it. But maternal instinct had taken the reins, and Evie Barker had never been one to sit idle when a life, let alone 3, hung in the balance. She stepped outside into the thickening snow, careful to avoid the main paths. The wind bit at her cheeks as she made her way toward the trailhead, her boots crunching quietly beneath the drifts. Once on the trail, she oriented herself using her GPS and a small laminated map she always kept in her pocket. Her destination lay northwest, beyond the maintained trails, through rough, rarely trodden land. It was a journey most would never consider attempting in daylight, let alone under a moonless sky. But Evie was not most people. She switched on her headlamp, took a breath that crystallized in the air before her, and began to climb. With every step away from civilization, the lodge's warm lights faded until they disappeared entirely. The forest around her was eerily quiet, the snow muffling all sound except for the wind rustling in the branches. Time blurred into an endless rhythm of movement and breath. 2 hours passed. Her muscles burned. Her face was raw from wind exposure, and snow clung to every crease of her clothing. But she pressed on. Somewhere ahead, her family was waiting, perhaps lost, perhaps scared, perhaps worse. Then, through the blizzard's curtain, a faint light caught her eye. She froze. A glow shimmered just beyond the trees, soft and golden. Not moonlight, not reflection. A window, a cabin, nestled between pines, partially hidden. A single-story structure stood with smoke curling from its chimney. Hope surged in her chest, thawing her exhaustion. She approached slowly, every step measured. As she reached the door, she knocked, her glove muffling the sound. No answer. She knocked again, louder. "Hello? Please, I need help." A heartbeat passed. Then 2. Just as she raised her hand for a third knock, the door creaked open. Naomi stood there, silhouetted in firelight. Her expression was blank with disbelief. "Evie," her voice broke. "What, how?" Evie's relief burst through, but her knees buckled before she could respond. Naomi pulled her inside quickly, helping her out of her snow-covered shell. "Evie, my God, what are you doing here?" Naomi asked, panic and confusion laced through every word. "I found the trail cam footage," Evie said, her voice hoarse. "Clint Jansen showed it to me. You and the girls. I knew you were alive." At the mention of the girls, 2 small voices called out. "Mom? Who's at the door?" Isla and Rowan peeked from behind a blanket-draped couch. "Grandma Evie," they cried in unison. Evie dropped to her knees, tears instantly stinging her cheeks. She held out her arms, and the twins ran to her, though hesitant from shock. She wrapped them tight, heart pounding with overwhelming emotion. They were thinner than she remembered, cheeks pale, but alive. Naomi ushered them back to their bedding area. "Go lie down, girls. Grandma needs to rest." She handed them mugs of rehydrated milk before tucking them in. "Good night, Grandma," Isla whispered. Rowan echoed the words sleepily. As their breathing evened out and the fire cracked gently, Evie turned to Naomi. Her voice lowered. "Where's David?" Naomi's face fell instantly. She sat down heavily at the table, gesturing for Evie to join her. "It was the storm," she said quietly. "We didn't check the forecast properly. We got caught in the worst of it. But why were you in this area?" Evie asked, trying to keep her tone calm. "You know this zone is dangerous." David knew that. "He wanted to try something different," Naomi said. "The girls were getting bored of the same trails. He thought we'd just explore the edge. But the storm hit sooner than expected." She paused, eyes wet. This cabin, it saved us. We found it just in time." "And David?" Evie pressed. Naomi's composure cracked. "The next morning, he said he'd hike out to get help. We had no cell signal. He thought he could reach the ranger station." Her voice dropped. "But he never came back. Another storm hit that night. I didn't know what to do." Evie's hands clenched around her mug. "You never went looking for him?" Naomi shook her head. "Not with the girls. I couldn't leave them alone." She swallowed hard. "I searched the immediate area a few days later, but by then it was too late." A long silence stretched between them. Then Evie said the words that had haunted her all evening. "But why didn't you come down when the weather cleared?" Naomi stared into the fire, her face unreadable. "I was scared," she whispered. "I didn't trust anyone. I thought maybe I'd be blamed." Evie said nothing, but something unsettled began to curl in her gut. She glanced around the cabin at the stacked firewood, the shelves of surprisingly fresh supplies. Then her eyes narrowed on a loose floorboard near the door. And her instincts, the ones honed over decades of wilderness survival, told her that something was very, very wrong. Evie rose from her chair with a stiffness born from cold and exhaustion, but her mind was far too alert to rest. Something about Naomi's story didn't sit right. The cabin, though modest, wasn't abandoned. There was too much evidence of recent use. The firewood stack by the door was not only large, but neatly cut and dry, ready to burn. The shelves in the kitchenette weren't filled with expired cans or old supplies. There were sealed boxes of powdered milk, vacuum-packed jerky, and even a few fresh items that couldn't have survived 3 weeks in an unused shelter. That wasn't the most alarming part. As Evie moved to discard her empty mug in the trash bin near the door, her eyes caught something, a faint glimmer beneath a cracked floorboard, just beside the hearth. She crouched slowly, careful not to draw Naomi's attention. She reached down and ran her fingers along the uneven board. It lifted with surprising ease, revealing a small compartment beneath. Nestled in the dust was a ring, a man's wedding band. Simple, with a single line of diamond inlay. A wave of nausea rolled over Evie as she picked it up. She knew this ring. It was David's. The metal was clean, no dirt or signs it had been buried there long. It hadn't been lost for weeks. It had been hidden. "Naomi," Evie called, her voice carefully neutral. Naomi turned from tending to the fire. "Yes." Evie held up the ring. "This is David's." Naomi's eyes widened, and for a moment, just a heartbeat, her face went blank, like she was caught off guard. Then she stepped forward, quickly composing herself. "It must have slipped off that first night," she said hurriedly. "We were all freezing. Our fingers were numb. He probably didn't even realize it had fallen through the cracks." Evie said nothing, watching as Naomi took the ring and slipped it onto her thumb. The explanation was plausible, but something in Naomi's eyes betrayed her. It was subtle, a flicker of panic poorly masked with grief. "That floorboard didn't feel loose by accident," Evie said slowly. "It lifted too cleanly. Maybe a hunter uses this cabin regularly," Naomi said, almost too quickly. "Maybe he hid something there before, and we just didn't notice." "You said this place was empty," Evie said, voice quiet. "Yet someone's clearly been maintaining it. The supplies, the chopped wood, even the chimneys clean. That doesn't happen on its own." Naomi's expression tightened. "I don't know, Evie. We were just trying to survive. Maybe someone stopped by when we were asleep. Maybe they left supplies and didn't want to wake us." Her answers came too fast, too neat. Evie nodded, as if accepting it, and walked back toward the kitchen area, glancing around again. Then she caught it, movement in the corner of her eye. Naomi was behind her, and, in that instant, instinct screamed. She turned, too late. Pain exploded at the base of her skull. Her vision flashed white, then black. Her body hit the wooden floor with a heavy thud, and everything faded to silence. Time passed. Minutes? Hours? Evie didn't know. When consciousness returned, it came in waves of pain. Her head throbbed, a deep, pulsing ache at the base of her skull. Her limbs were cold, heavy. She tried to move and realized she couldn't. Her hands were bound behind the back of a wooden chair. Her ankles were lashed to its legs. Panic rose as she blinked against the blur and looked around. The fire had burned low, reduced to glowing embers. Shadows danced across the cabin walls. The air stank of something sharp and chemical, gasoline. Evie's breath caught. She twisted her wrists, testing the ropes. They were tight, but not professionally tied. She could feel a slight give when she shifted her weight. The cold air bit at her skin, and the gas fumes made her stomach churn. She scanned the room. The twins were gone. The bed where they had slept was empty. No sign of Naomi either. She was alone, and someone had set a trap. The fire would eventually reach the gas. It would ignite. Evie's mind kicked into survival mode. She began to rock the chair, slowly at first, then harder. Each movement sent jolts of pain through her head, but she grit her teeth. The chair creaked. Wood splintered. On the fourth try, she slammed the side into the ground. One of the legs cracked. It wasn't much, but it was enough to shift her weight. She maneuvered her bound hands toward her coat pocket, fingers trembling from cold and blood restriction. She searched until she found it, her compact folding knife. It was standard issue back in her ranger days, and she never hiked without it. Now it might save her life. With clumsy effort, she flicked it open against the edge of a chair and began sawing at the rope. The gas smell was getting stronger. She could hear it, an insidious hiss coming from the heater vent. Someone had left the line open. When the final rope snapped, she lunged forward, fumbling at the bindings on her legs. Just then, a soft whoosh behind her sent panic surging through her veins. A small flare had caught along the gas trail near the fireplace. The fire was coming. She slashed at the last rope and sprang to her feet, dizzy and unsteady. She staggered to the door. Locked. She grabbed a firewood log from the bin and hurled it at the nearest window. The glass cracked. Another blow. It shattered, spilling shards onto the snow beyond. Smoke curled around the ceiling. The fire crept along the wall like a serpent. She climbed through the broken frame, ignoring the glass that tore into her coat, slicing her thigh. She tumbled into the snow, rolling away from the growing blaze. Behind her, the cabin began to roar. Flames erupted from the windows, curling up into the night sky. Her gear, her GPS, her supplies, all gone. But she was alive. For now. And Naomi, who had lied, who had tried to kill her, was gone, somewhere in the forest with one of the girls. Evie pushed her feet, wincing at the deep cut on her leg. She looked around, trying to find direction. Then, faint through the trees, she heard it. A voice. High. Frightened. A child's voice. Grandma. Grandma Evie. Without hesitation, Evie stumbled toward the sound, heart pounding. The trees opened into a small clearing. Against a rock, a small figure huddled. Lavender jacket. Rowan. Her leg was bent at an unnatural angle. Evie dropped beside her, cradling her face. Rowan, sweetie. I'm here. The child sobbed. Mom said I was too slow. She said, sacrifice. Then she left with Isla. Rage unlike anything Evie had ever known surged in her chest. She looked at the girl's leg, swollen, possibly broken. But she was alive. I'm going to get you out of here, Evie whispered, pulling off her scarf to make a makeshift splint. Rowan clung to her, whimpering. Evie wrapped her securely in her coat and lifted her into her arms. Despite the pain in her leg, the burns on her arms, and the fear clawing at her. She started walking. Each step into the snow was a promise. I will save you. I will find Isla. And I will make your mother answer for what she's done. The descent down the mountain was brutal. Evie's arms burned from carrying Rowan, her breath coming in ragged bursts as the cold sliced through her remaining layers. Every step was a calculated risk: snow-covered rocks, hidden dips in the trail, branches snapping underfoot. Her injured leg throbbed with each movement, the glass wound from the window steadily bleeding through her pants. But she pressed on. She had no choice. Rowan's small arms clung tightly to her neck, her face buried in Evie's shoulder, body trembling with pain and cold. The makeshift splint had stabilized the child's ankle somewhat, but she was still in agony. Evie whispered to her softly with each step, repeating like a mantra, "You're safe now. I've got you. Just a little further." Time lost meaning as the stars crawled slowly overhead. The forest grew denser before thinning again, revealing distant glimpses of trail markers. It meant they were getting closer to maintained paths. That meant people. That meant safety. By the time the eastern horizon began to glow with the first hints of dawn, Evie's knees were buckling with every step. Her boots were soaked through, her gloves stiff with frozen blood. But she kept going. Just as she spotted the familiar wooden trail signage that marked the outer boundary of the lodge property, a voice rang out through the morning quiet. "Hey, is someone there?" A flashlight beam swept through the trees. Evie stumbled forward, shouting back, "Help! We need help here." Figures emerged, early morning hikers, bundled up, wide-eyed as they ran toward her. Rowan whimpered, too weak now to cry. Evie collapsed to her knees, still holding the child protectively. Several people gathered around, offering hands, voices overlapping in shock and urgency. "Oh my God, that's Evelyn Barker," someone gasped. "And one of the missing girls. Get the manager, call emergency services." Evie felt herself being lifted, steady arms guiding her inside the lodge. The warmth hit her like a wall, and she nearly fainted from the sudden change. Blankets were wrapped around both her and Rowan. Staff members moved with swift efficiency, one checking Evie's pulse, another examining Rowan's swollen ankle. "Grandma Evie," the girl murmured, barely conscious. "It's okay, sweetheart. You're safe," Evie whispered, brushing damp hair from the child's forehead. "You did so good. I'm so proud of you." The lodge manager knelt beside her, face pale. "Miss Barker, what happened? Where is your daughter-in-law? Where's the other child?" Evie looked up, her voice steady despite the exhaustion. "Rachel tried to kill me. She left Rowan in the snow with a broken leg. And she's gone with Isla." Gasps rippled through the room. Staff began dialing phones, alerting authorities, even as the first wail of sirens echoed faintly in the distance. The police and paramedics arrived within minutes. Rowan was placed on a stretcher, her legs stabilized and wrapped. Evie refused to leave her side. "I want to ride with her," she insisted. "Of course," the paramedic said. "We'll take you both." As they loaded into the medical helicopter, an officer approached. "Miss Barker, we'll need to take a full statement from you as soon as possible. We've already received conflicting information." Evie's brow furrowed. What kind of conflicting information? A woman, claiming to be Rachel Barker, was found at the main park entrance early this morning by a hunter. She had a child with her. She's saying you tracked them down, attacked her, and tried to take the children by force. Evie stared at him, stunned. "That's insane. She tried to murder me. She left Rowan to die. And she set that cabin on fire with me still inside." The officer made notes, nodding solemnly. "We'll sort it out. For now, your safety, and the child's, comes first." Inside the helicopter, Evie held tightly to Rowan's hand as they lifted into the air. The child's face was pale, eyes fluttering beneath closed lids. A medic checked her vitals, nodding with satisfaction. She's stable. She'll need surgery to repair the leg, but she's strong. Evie exhaled, heart pounding with a complex mixture of relief and dread. Rachel had made it to safety first and twisted the story. What lies was she telling Isla? What damage was she still capable of? At the hospital, they were taken into the emergency bay, assessed, and separated briefly. Evie's head wound was stitched, her leg cleaned and bandaged. The doctors confirmed a concussion and insisted she stay for observation. "I'll only agree," she said, "if I'm on the same floor as my granddaughter." "That can be arranged," a nurse replied gently. Rowan's surgery was scheduled quickly. Before she was taken into the operating room, Evie held her hand. "You'll be okay, baby girl. I'll be here when you wake up. I promise." The girl nodded groggily, already drifting from the anesthesia. Evie signed the consent forms, stepping back as the surgical team wheeled her away. Back in the waiting area, an unexpected figure appeared. Clint Jansen, the hunter, the man who had shown her the footage. His expression was grim, jaw tight. "Miss Barker," he said quietly, nodding to the officer standing nearby. "I need to talk to you both. There's something I haven't told you." They were led to a private consultation room where two more officers waited. Clint looked down for a long moment before speaking. "I lied. 3 weeks ago, I didn't just find Naomi and the kids on camera. I found them in my cabin. They'd already taken shelter there during the first storm. David was with them." Evie's heart froze. "David was alive." Clint nodded. "I left them there with food and promised to return. But when I came back the next morning, only Rachel and the girls were inside. Rachel said David had gone out to look for help. I believed her at first. But then I overheard an argument. The girls were crying. I went outside and saw Rachel push David off a cliff." The room went dead silent. Evie's breath left her lungs in a whoosh. "You saw it?" "Yes," Clint said, his voice shaking. "I was frozen. I didn't know what to do. Then Rachel saw me. She offered me money, said she'd use David's life insurance to pay me to stay quiet. $2 million. Said all I had to do was bring them supplies and keep my mouth shut." One of the officers leaned forward. "Why come forward now?" Clint looked sick. "Because she was planning to frame me. I heard her talking to her lawyer. She was going to claim I killed David and threatened her. I couldn't be part of it anymore. Not after what she did to that little girl." Evie sat in stunned silence. Her worst fears confirmed. Her son had been murdered. Not lost. Not fallen. Pushed by the woman he trusted most. "She killed him," Evie said quietly. "And she tried to kill me to cover it up." One of the officers stood. "Mr. Jansen, you are under arrest for being an accessory after the fact to homicide." Clint didn't resist. As they cuffed him, he looked back at Evie. "I'm sorry. I should have done something sooner. I hope you can forgive me someday." Evie said nothing, only watching as they led him away. Forgiveness was far from her heart. All she could think about was Isla, still with Rachel, still in danger. After Clint was escorted out in handcuffs, Evie remained seated in the consultation room, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, the dull ache in her skull pulsing behind her eyes. The truth had finally surfaced, yet it brought no relief, only the bitter confirmation of her suspicions. David hadn't died trying to save his family. He had been murdered, pushed off a cliff by the woman he loved, the mother of his children. Rachel had watched him fall and then spun lies around the tragedy, manipulating the silence of the wilderness to hide her crime. And now she was trying to paint Evie as the villain. A nurse entered quietly and informed her that Rowan's surgery was successful. "She's in recovery now," You'll be able to see her soon." Evie nodded, grateful for at least one piece of good news. The nurse led her down the hallway, past rooms buzzing with morning hospital routines, until they reached the recovery wing. Inside one of the rooms, Rowan lay curled beneath a white blanket, her leg elevated in a cast. An 4-line ran to her small arm, and heart monitor leads dotted her chest. Her face was pale, eyes closed, but her breathing was steady. Evie took a seat beside her, brushing a strand of hair from the girl's forehead. "You're safe now," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I'm right here." She stayed there until a soft knock at the door drew her attention. A social worker stood with a clipboard, accompanied by a uniformed officer. "Miss Barker," the officer said, "Rachel Whitaker is currently being detained in the hospital under guard. Based on Clint Jansen's statement, along with your account and the child's condition, we have enough to move forward with arrest charges. However, we'd like to offer you the opportunity to witness the formal reading of her rights." Evie hesitated for only a moment. "Yes, I need to see her." They led her through a secure corridor toward another wing of the hospital. Outside one of the rooms stood 2 officers. One of them nodded at her arrival and opened the door. Inside, Rachel sat upright in the hospital bed, for still in place, face blank. She didn't look surprised to see Evie. Her eyes narrowed, and for the first time, Evie saw her not as the woman her son had loved, not as the mother of her grandchildren, but as the manipulator, the murderer, the woman who had nearly taken everything from her. "Rachel Whitaker," the lead detective began formally, "you are under arrest for the murder of David Whitaker and the attempted murder of Evelyn Barker and Rowan Whitaker. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you." "Lies," Rachel snapped, her voice brittle and sharp. "Clint's lying. He's the one who killed David. I was protecting my children." "Save it for your lawyer," the detective cut her off, continuing the Miranda rights without pause. Evie stepped closer, her voice low but steady. "Why, Rachel? Why did you do it?" Rachel's jaw clenched, and for a moment she didn't answer. Then she spat. "He was going to leave me. He'd already met someone else. He was changing the will. Everything we built. He was just going to throw it away." Evie stared at her, shocked. "David would never cheat on you. He met with lawyers. Had papers drawn up," Rachel continued, eyes glassy with rage. "He said it was just a precaution, but I knew what it meant. I saw how he looked at her. Always texting, always late. So you pushed him off a cliff," Evie said bitterly. "With your daughters nearby. They weren't supposed to see," Rachel muttered. "They were supposed to stay in the cabin." Her voice cracked. "Everything went wrong after that. And you tried to kill me," Evie added. "Set the cabin on fire with me inside." Rachel said nothing, but her silence spoke louder than words. The detectives signaled the officers, and one of them cuffed Rachel's wrists to the bed rail. "You'll be transported to the detention center as soon as you're medically cleared," he said. Evie turned and left the room without another word. Her heart pounded as she made her way back to Rowan's room. Along the way, another nurse approached her. "Miss Barker, Ivy is awake. She's in a secured pediatric room down the hall, under supervision. Would you like to see her?" Evie's breath caught. Ivy, the other half of the twins. The girl Rachel had taken with her. "Yes, please." The nurse led her to the room. A social worker sat in the corner, and Ivy sat upright in bed, wrapped in a fuzzy blanket, her wide eyes fixed on the door as Evie entered. "Grandma?" she asked, voice tentative. "Hi, sweetheart," Evie said softly, approaching slowly. "Where's Run?" Ivy asked immediately, voice small. "She's safe," Evie reassured her. "She had to have surgery on her leg, but she's going to be okay. You'll see her very soon." Ivy's lip trembled. "Where's Mom?" Evie knelt beside her bed, taking her small hands in hers. Your mom is with some people right now who need to ask her questions about what happened on the mountain. Evie's eyes brimmed with tears. Daddy's not coming back, is he? Evie's heart shattered all over again. No, sweetheart, she said gently. Daddy loved you very, very much. And I promise I'll make sure you always remember that. Evie flung herself into Evie's arms, sobbing. Evie held her tightly, rocking her gently as the girl's body shook with the weight of what she could barely understand. It's going to be okay, she whispered over and over. I'm here now. I've got you. I've got both of you. Evie's sobs slowed, her breathing evened out, and soon she was asleep in Evie's arms. The social worker approached quietly. We'll arrange for both girls to be placed in your temporary custody pending guardianship hearings. Evie nodded. Thank you. That's all I want, for them to be safe, for them to heal. As she carried Evie back to the recovery room where Rowan had been moved, Evie felt the weight of everything that had happened settle on her shoulders. The mountain had taken her son, but it hadn't taken his daughters. And she would make sure no one ever hurt them again. She sat between their beds, one hand resting on each small arm, her heart aching but resolute. Rachel would face trial. Clint would be sentenced for his role. But her focus now was the girls, her legacy, her reason to keep going. She had hiked through blizzards, faced death, escaped fire, and exposed a killer. And now, as morning sunlight filtered through the window, warming the pale faces of the sleeping girls, Evelyn Barker made a silent vow. She would carry them through the long road ahead. She would honor David's memory. And she would make sure Evie and Rowan knew, every single day, that love was stronger than betrayal, that truth always clawed its way to the surface, and that their grandmother would never stop fighting for them. Later that evening, after both girls had fallen into deep medication-assisted sleep, Evie was granted permission to speak with the detective in charge of the case in a quieter part of the hospital. She was physically and emotionally drained, but she knew the hardest parts were still to come. Custody hearings, testimonies, legal proceedings, the healing of two children who had seen and experienced far too much. The detective, a composed woman named Marla Reyes, led her into a private consultation room adjacent to the pediatric wing. Miss Barker, she began, I wanted to let you know we've confirmed with the insurance company that David's life policy was set to undergo changes, but the paperwork hadn't been finalized. Rachel remained the primary beneficiary at the time of his death. Evie's face tightened. So that's why she did it. It certainly seems to be the motive, Reyes replied. The timeline matches what Clint described. Rachel likely knew about the impending changes and acted before David could finish them. That, combined with her paranoia about him leaving, might have been the trigger. She didn't just kill him, Evie said bitterly. She tried to murder me. And she abandoned her own child. There is no excuse, no psychological stress that explains that level of cruelty. Reyes nodded solemnly. We agree. The district attorney has already been briefed and is preparing to file formal charges tomorrow morning. Given the attempted murder and child endangerment, it's likely she'll be held without bail pending trial. Evie exhaled slowly, her body aching as though every part of her was unraveling after days of being wound too tight. And Clint? He's cooperating, Reyes said. His confession helped us find the location of David's remains. Search and recovery teams are already en route to the coordinates he provided. They expect to retrieve the body before snowfall covers the area again. A fresh wave of sorrow passed over Evie. She hadn't let herself fully grieve David yet. There hadn't been time or space for it. Her focus had been survival, protection, justice. But the thought of his body lying cold and alone on a mountain slope for 3 weeks struck her like a blade. Reyes placed a hand gently on her shoulder. We'll ensure he's brought back with dignity. You'll be notified immediately when they've recovered him." Evie swallowed past the lump in her throat. "Thank you." They stood in silence for a moment before Reyes added, "There's something else." Ivy's interview with our child advocate revealed something troubling. Evie's eyes snapped up. "What?" "Rachel apparently told Ivy repeatedly that you were coming to take them away, that you were dangerous," Reyes said carefully. "She may have been trying to turn Ivy against you in case she needed to manipulate the story. Ivy's confused, understandably, but we believe with time and consistent care, she'll come to understand the truth." Evie's heart ached. That poor girl, to be pulled in so many directions, fed lies, then abandoned in the woods. "She's already responding well to you," Reyes said. "The advocate believes your presence is helping her stabilize." Evie nodded, her voice low. "I'll undo the damage, no matter how long it takes." When she returned to the room, both girls were still sleeping. Rowan had rolled slightly toward the window, her small arm draped over the side of the bed, the white cast on her leg reflecting the pale moonlight. Ivy, curled on her side, clutched the stuffed bear the nurse had given her, the same one that now smelled faintly of antiseptic and chocolate pudding. Evie pulled a chair between their beds and settled in with a sigh. The quiet of the room was a stark contrast to the chaos of the last few days. She let the silence wash over her. There was something sacred in this stillness, a fragile peace carved out from devastation. She didn't sleep that night. Her body couldn't relax. Her thoughts refused to still. Every creak in the hallway, every flicker of light from under the door made her heart jolt. She kept her eyes on the girls, watching their chests rise and fall, as if needing to verify their existence with every breath. At dawn, a nurse gently knocked and entered. "We've set up a private suite for you and the girls in the long-term care wing," she said. "You'll have more space and privacy there while the doctors complete their evaluations." Evie helped them gather the girls, who remained groggy but compliant as they were wheeled to the new room. It was simple but bright, with 2 small beds and a recliner near the window. A framed print of a mountain sunrise hung above the dresser, a quiet reminder of where all this began. Evie settled in as the girls were tucked under fresh blankets. Breakfast arrived, mostly untouched by the children, but Evie forced herself to eat, knowing she needed strength. Just after noon, a representative from Child Protective Services arrived to begin the preliminary guardianship paperwork. "We've expedited the process," the woman explained. "Given the circumstances and the evidence against Rachel, you're the clear choice for emergency placement." Evie signed everything with a steady hand, even as emotions churned beneath her surface. When the woman left, promising a formal custody hearing within the week, Evie sat back and exhaled. She had fought to bring them back. Now, she would fight to keep them safe. That afternoon, Rowan woke fully and asked, "Can I see Daddy?" Evie sat on the edge of her bed, stroking her hair. "Sweetheart, Daddy can't come back. But he loved you so much. And you carry him with you. Always." Rowan's eyes welled up, but she nodded slowly. Ivy watched quietly from the other bed, her expression unreadable. "Why did Mommy lie?" she asked suddenly. Evie looked at her, trying to find the right words. "Sometimes people get scared, and they make terrible choices. But what happened wasn't your fault. And it's not Ren's fault either. The only thing that matters now is that you're safe. You're together. And you're not alone." Ivy stared at her for a long time before finally whispering, "Okay." Later, the hospital staff brought in art supplies and picture books, trying to restore some sense of normalcy. The girls colored quietly, drawing lopsided hearts and mountain peaks, occasionally glancing toward Evie for reassurance. She was always there, within reach, within sight. The hospital had become a strange kind of sanctuary. As evening fell again, and the room dimmed under soft lights, Ivy looked up and asked, "Grandma, are we going home soon?" Evie reached across the bed, took both girls' hands in hers. "Not today, but soon. And when we do, we'll make it a new kind of home. One where you can feel safe. One where Daddy's memory lives on in every room." Ivy nodded, and Rowan leaned her head against Evie's arm. For the first time since the ordeal began, they all closed their eyes and drifted into a peaceful, untroubled sleep. The road ahead would be long, courtrooms, therapy, questions with no easy answers. But they had each other now, and Evelyn Barker knew she would face whatever came next with the same courage that had carried her through the storm. This was just the beginning of their healing. 3 days later, under a clear morning sky, Evie stood just outside the county courthouse, her arms gently wrapped around Rowan and Ivy as they huddled close beside her. The girls wore soft wool coats donated by a local women's shelter, and though their eyes still held traces of exhaustion and unease, there was something steadier in their posture now, something a little more solid. Behind them, media vans lined the street, satellite dishes pointed skyward, cameras aimed at the entrance. Word of the tragic case had spread quickly. Former ranger discovers her missing family, uncovers murder, survives attempted homicide. The narrative had gripped the public imagination, and Evie had done her best to shield the girls from it. But now, as they waited to be ushered into the courtroom for the emergency guardianship hearing, it was impossible to ignore. Inside the courthouse, a team of attorneys worked in tight coordination. Rachel, transported from the county detention facility that morning, was seated at the defense table in a dull beige jumpsuit, her expression unreadable. Her once carefully managed hair now hung limply against her face, and her eyes darted occasionally toward the door, as if expecting a miracle to burst through it and change everything. Evie watched her from the hallway through a narrow window in the courtroom door. Even now, knowing everything, seeing the depth of Rachel's betrayal and the horrors she had inflicted, there was a strange ache in Evie's chest. She thought of the woman Rachel had once seemed to be: loving, attentive, creative, a devoted mother. Was it all a lie? Or had something inside her unraveled over time, piece by piece, until nothing remained but desperation? "Ms. Barker," a clerk called, breaking her from the thought. "They're ready for you." She gathered the girls' hands and stepped into the courtroom. The room fell quiet as they entered. The judge, a woman in her 60s with a reputation for being firm but compassionate, glanced over her reading glasses as Evie approached. "Thank you for being here today, Ms. Barker, and thank you for everything you've done to protect these children." Evie nodded, her throat tightening. She helped the girls into the designated seats, and then took her place before the bench. The judge reviewed the file before her, the sound of paper shuffling echoing in the chamber. "I've reviewed the emergency petition for guardianship as well as the supporting evidence from the district attorney's office. Given the extraordinary circumstances, the attempted murder of the petitioner, the confirmed homicide of the children's father, and the immediate danger presented by the mother, I am prepared to grant full temporary guardianship to Ms. Barker effective immediately." A collective breath seemed to release across the room. Rachel, silent until then, suddenly stood. "They're my children," she shouted, voice cracking. "You can't take them from me." The bailiff stepped forward, but the judge raised a hand. "Mrs. Whitaker, you will have your day in court. But given the evidence presented, your attempt to flee with one child while abandoning the other to die in sub-zero temperatures, this court finds you unfit for custody at this time." Rachel turned her eyes toward Ivy, who shrank back instinctively behind Evie. "Baby, please," Rachel said, tears spilling now. "I did it all for you and your sister. I just wanted us to be safe." Ivy didn't answer. She clutched Evie's hand tightly and stared at the floor. Rowan refused to look at her mother at all. "Take her back," the judge instructed quietly, and the bailiff moved in. Rachel struggled briefly, tears turning to incoherent shouts as she was led away. The girls' faces were pale, their small bodies rigid. Evie dropped to her knees in front of them, blocking their view of the chaos, her hands gently cupping their cheeks. "It's over," she whispered. "You're with me now. You're safe." The courtroom slowly emptied. Outside, reporters shouted questions, but the bailiff held them back as Evie and the girls were guided through a side exit. A quiet car waited for them, arranged by a family services liaison. As they drove away, the courthouse fading in the rearview mirror, Ivy leaned her head against Evie's arm. "She didn't say sorry," the girl said softly. Evie kissed the top of her head. "I know. Sometimes people can't face what they've done. But we're going to move forward, sweetheart. We're going to heal together." That evening, back at the hospital suite, the girls resumed their cautious routines, coloring quietly, reading picture books, watching soft cartoons on mute. Evie sat by the window, sipping lukewarm tea, listening to the sound of their voices as they discussed what flavor pudding was the best. Vanilla, chocolate, banana. The conversation was ordinary, and the normalcy of it brought her to tears. Not loud ones, but quiet, steady ones that rolled down her cheeks and caught in the collar of her flannel shirt. The phone rang shortly after sunset. It was Detective Reyes. "Evie," she said, "they recovered David's body this afternoon. He was found at the base of the ravine Clint described. No signs of struggle beyond the fall itself. We're arranging for transport to the county morgue tonight. You'll be contacted tomorrow about arrangements." "Thank you," Evie said, her voice barely above a whisper. Was he alone?" "Yes," Reyes said gently, "but we're going to make sure he's brought home properly." Evie ended the call and sat in silence for a long time. When the girls were asleep again, Rowan nestled against a pillow with a coloring book still clutched in her hand. Ivy curled beneath a blanket that smelled of hospital detergent and peanut butter crackers. Evie stood at the window and looked out at the city below. Headlights passed like silent fireflies, people going about their lives, unaware of the wars fought in the hearts of those just a few floors above. She closed her eyes and made a quiet promise. She would give them peace. She would build something new for them, not to replace what they had lost, because nothing ever could, but to honor it, to rise from it, to survive it, because they were survivors now, all of them. The funeral was held 1 week later under a soft gray sky, the clouds hanging low over the foothills like a woolen shroud. The air smelled of pine and damp earth, and the nearby ridgelines of the North Cascades were still dusted with snow, a silent reminder of where David had taken his last breath. Evie stood between two small figures in black wool coats, their mittened hands clutching her own as the minister's voice carried over the hill. Ivy and Rowan, dressed in solemn formality for the first time in their short lives, had been quiet all morning, their eyes wide and unreadable, their lips pressed into straight lines. They had asked about the service only once, Ivy whispering, "Will it be like in movies? With music and flowers?" Evie had answered gently, "It'll be simple, honest, just like your dad would have wanted." And now here they were, standing beneath a modest green canopy, as David's casket rested beside the open grave. A few close friends from Evie's ranger years had come, as had a handful of David's former co-workers from the forestry office. Even Clint, escorted in a beige prison transport van and allowed a brief appearance in handcuffs under tight supervision, stood off to the side, his expression heavy with remorse. Evie hadn't spoken to him since the confession. She wasn't ready to offer forgiveness, but she hadn't objected to his request to attend. After all, he had told the truth, and that truth had brought her granddaughters home. The minister spoke kindly, offering words about nature, strength, family, and love. He recalled David's respect for the wilderness, his childhood spent chasing his mother along ranger trails, his dream of raising his daughters to love the world's wild edges the way he had. He died in a place he loved, the minister said. But his legacy lives on, in his children, in those who knew him, and in the strength of the family he leaves behind. Evie felt the tears streak silently down her face, but she didn't look away. She wanted to memorize every detail of this moment, to hold it in her chest where grief and love had entwined into something unshakable. When the time came to place flowers on the casket, Evie led the girls forward. Ivy held a single pine cone they had found on the hospital grounds, a symbol, she had said, of the mountains. Rowan held a small yellow wildflower they'd picked on the way to the cemetery, its petals delicate but bright. Evie placed a folded photograph, one of the last David had sent her, the four of them smiling beneath the ridge, all still intact. Then, together, they watched as the casket was slowly lowered into the ground. Ivy pressed her face into Evie's side. Rowan clung to her hand. Neither cried, not yet. Their sorrow was too large to understand fully, and Evie knew it would come later. In the quiet moments, the forgotten echoes, the empty chairs at dinner time. After the burial, the attendees gathered in the small cemetery lodge for coffee and sandwiches. Evie stayed only briefly, accepting condolences, shaking hands, answering soft-spoken comments with nods. The girls stuck close, unwilling to let go. Eventually, she excused them all and stepped outside. The air was cold and clean, and the trees rustled with a slow wind. The girls followed her wordlessly as she led them to the car, buckled them in, and started the drive back to the lodge where they were now staying, while waiting for the formal guardianship paperwork to finalize. The ride was quiet until Rowan asked, "Is Daddy in the sky now?" Evie glanced at her in the rear-view mirror. "Some people believe that," she said softly. "Some people think he's part of the stars, or the trees, or the wind. I think he's everywhere you need him to be." Ivy stared out the window, her voice barely audible. "I think he's in the mountains." Evie's eyes stung again. "Then that's where he'll always be for you." That evening, after a simple dinner and long baths, Evie tucked the girls into their beds. They had insisted on pushing the twin beds together so they could sleep side by side. She read them a story, one David used to read to them, and stayed long after their eyes had closed, just watching their chests rise and fall, listening to the quiet hum of the night. Later, alone on the porch of the cabin, with a blanket over her shoulders and a steaming mug of chamomile tea in her hand, Evie let the silence settle around her. The stars above were brilliant, the kind of brilliance you only saw in the backcountry, far from the city's noise and glow. She looked up and whispered, "I found them, David. I brought them back. I wish to God I could have brought you too." The wind picked up, tugging at the edge of her blanket like a familiar nudge, and she allowed herself to believe that somewhere, somehow, David had heard her. Inside the cabin, a light flicked on, and a soft voice called out, "Grandma." It was Ivy peeking from the doorway, her hair tousled and face pale in the porch light. "Can't sleep," she said. "Come here," Evie replied, opening her arms. The girl curled up beside her on the porch swing, resting her head on Evie's shoulder. They sat like that for a long time. Eventually, Ivy asked, "Will you ever tell us everything? About what happened up there?" Evie hesitated. "Someday," she said. "When you're older. When you're ready." Ivy nodded. "Okay." They rocked slowly in the swing, the stars turning overhead, the world quiet for the first time in weeks. It wasn't peace, not yet, but it was the beginning of it. 6 months later, the first signs of spring reached the valley below the North Cascades, and with them came the final hearing. Evie stood before the court again, not as a desperate grandmother or a witness to a tragedy, but as the legal guardian of two girls who had survived the unthinkable. The proceedings were brief. The state had long since dropped any attempts to challenge her guardianship, and Rachel, now officially charged and awaiting trial for murder and attempted murder, had no legal recourse remaining. She had stopped requesting visitation after her first two letters, sent from jail and addressed to Ivy, were returned unopened. Evie had read them, quietly, privately, before deciding that the time wasn't right. She'd spoken to child psychologists, therapists, and counselors, and they all agreed. Healing came slowly, and truth had to be introduced gently, with care and space for the girls to form their own understanding. After the hearing, Ivy and Rowan each received a handmade certificate from the clerk, guardianship granted, with their names in bold print and a smiling signature at the bottom. Rowan beamed, showing off her newly missing front tooth, while Ivy held hers close to her chest like a secret letter. "Does this mean you're officially our mom now?" Rowan asked later that night as they lay in bed, the lights low and the window open to let in the smell of budding pine. Evie smiled and sat on the edge of the bed. "I'll never replace your mom or your dad," she said gently, brushing a curl from Rowan's forehead. "But yes, I'm the one taking care of you now. Forever." Ivy turned to face her, eyes soft but serious. "Will we ever see her again?" Evie didn't lie. "Maybe one day if you want to. But only when you're ready. And only if it's safe. That's something we'll decide together." The girls nodded, and Evie could see how much they'd grown in those few months, not just taller or healthier, but stronger in ways children should never have to be strong. She carried their grief with her every day, but she also carried their laughter, their questions, their tentative hope. It was that hope that led her, one bright morning in late May, to take the girls back to the place where it all began. Not to the cabin, which had long since burned down and been closed off by Forest Service investigation, but to the lower trails of the North Cascades, where David had once carried the twins on his shoulders, where they had taken their first steps on mossy paths, where Evie had taught them the names of trees and how to listen to the wind. They started on a familiar trail, the one with the overlook where the last family photo had been taken. Ivy carried a copy of that photo now, laminated and tucked into her backpack. Rowan had her sketch pad, and Evie brought water, snacks, and a small bundle wrapped in cloth. They hiked slowly, stopping often for rest or curiosity. The girls pointed out squirrels, birds, and wildflowers beginning to push through the thawed earth. At the overlook, they paused. The view hadn't changed. Mountains still stood tall, the valley stretched wide, and the wind whispered across the ridges. "He loved this place," Ivy said. "He wanted to bring us here every year." Evie nodded. "And now you'll remember him every time you come." She handed Ivy the bundle. Inside was a small wooden box, hand-carved with David's initials. Ivy opened it carefully. Inside were a few of David's ashes, a folded letter Evie had written, and a tiny carved bear, one of his ranger keepsakes. Rowan took the bear and held it tightly. Evie stepped forward to the edge, knelt, and scattered the ashes into the wind. The breeze caught them gently, carrying them out over the valley in soft, swirling ribbons. Ivy stood beside her, eyes closed, lips moving in a whisper Evie couldn't hear. Rowan knelt too, placing the bear on a flat stone and setting the photo beside it. The wind lifted the corners, but she anchored it with a pebble. "We'll come back every year," Rowan said. "On this day." "Deal," Ivy whispered. They stood together in silence, 3 generations bound by grief, survival, and love. As they made their way back down the trail, Evie felt lighter, not because the pain had vanished, but because it had found a place. It no longer clawed at her. It rested, carried but not dominant. That night back at home, an old ranger's cabin Evie had renovated with her savings and a lot of donated help, they baked cookies and watched a wildlife documentary. Rowan fell asleep halfway through, chocolate still on her chin, and Ivy helped carry her to bed. When Evie returned to the kitchen, she found a note on the table in Ivy's handwriting. "Thank you for finding us." It was small, simple, and written in purple marker. Evie pressed it to her heart and closed her eyes. In the months that followed, life settled into a rhythm. Therapy sessions continued, school began again, and Evie found herself packing lunches, mending jeans, and signing permission slips. There were moments of sadness, when Ivy had nightmares, or when Rowan asked why her dad never got to teach her how to fish. But there were also bursts of joy. A birthday party with cupcakes, a school play where Ivy played a tree, Rowan's first ride without training wheels. And sometimes, late at night, Evie would step out onto the porch with a cup of tea and look up at the stars. She'd think about David, about the way he used to laugh when he told ranger stories, about the way he had looked at his daughters like they were the entire world. She hoped, wherever he was, that he knew they were okay, that they were safe, that his mother had kept her promise. One night, Ivy joined her on the porch again, just like that first spring evening. She was taller now, quieter in her thoughts, more like David every day. "Do you think we'll ever go back up to the higher trails?" she asked. Evie wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "One day, when we're ready, together." Ivy nodded and leaned against her. "I think he'd like that." And there, beneath the vast, starry sky, Evelyn Barker smiled, not because the pain had ended, but because love had endured. Through fire, through storm, through silence, love had survived. And so had they. If this story moved you, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life inspired mysteries. Tell us where you're watching from in the comments. And if you believe in hope after tragedy, type "God bless this family" below.